They said retirement would be peaceful. I thought 5 acres of rich soil tucked against the edge of Maple Ridge Estates would finally give me the quiet life I had worked for. Just me, my vegetables, and the open sky. But that illusion shattered the morning HOA Karen Whitmore showed up at my fence line designer sunglasses flashing and declared my farm a violation of community standards. What started as a petty argument over tomatoes spiraled into a full-blown war of trespassing, crop theft, vandalism, and even a secret rezoning plot backed by powerful connections at the county level. Every stalk I planted became a battlefield, every ripe fruit a target. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just a tired old farmer. I had 3 decades of grit documentation and a lawyer who knew exactly how to fight back. This is the story of how one stubborn HOA tried to steal my livelihood and how I turned their arrogance into their downfall. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The first time I laid eyes on the land, I thought it was the answer to every dream I'd ever tucked away in the back of my mind. 5 acres of rich, loamy soil stretched out under the sun, bordered by a row of maples that turned the sky into a fire of red and gold each fall. After 30 years of teaching science to restless teenagers and saving every penny I could, this patch of earth was my reward. My plan was simple: grow organic vegetables, sell them at the farmer's market, and finally live out my retirement in peace. I had no idea that peace was the one thing I wouldn't get. It started with the crunch of footsteps on gravel one morning while I was bent over my tomato beds. When I looked up, I found a woman standing at the property line. She was maybe in her mid-50s, dressed in spotless slacks and a tailored blazer, her blonde bob cut sharp enough to slice paper. Designer sunglasses shielded her eyes, but not the scowl twisting her mouth. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. "You can't grow food here," she snapped, arms crossed like a judge about to hand down a sentence. "This isn't some backwater farm. This is Maple Ridge Estates." I wiped my hands on my jeans, trying to keep calm. "Actually, I can. This property has been farmland for more than 50 years. I bought it fair and square. Zoning maps mark it as agricultural. My deed says the same." Her face reddened. "I'm the president of the Maple Ridge HOA. And your so-called farm violates at least 6 community guidelines." She said the word farm like it was a slur. I straightened up, every muscle tightening. "My land isn't part of your HOA. I checked before I signed the papers. You don't have jurisdiction here." She pulled out her phone, snapping photos of my raised beds. "These weeds are an eyesore. Neighbors are already complaining about bugs and smells. You're dragging down property values." I almost laughed. "Weeds. These are heirloom tomatoes worth a small fortune at market. And as for smells, there are no animals here, only vegetables. The only thing anyone smells is fresh soil." Her lips pinched so tight they nearly disappeared. "We'll see about that. Expect a notice soon." And with that, she stormed off, heels clicking on the pavement, leaving faint dust prints on her pristine white shoes. I tried to shake it off, but the knot in my gut told me otherwise. I'd heard stories about HOA presidents who treated their titles like crowns, but I never thought they'd target me. That night, I dug out every scrap of paperwork I had, deed zoning certificate maps, and spread them across my kitchen table. Sure enough, my property was clearly marked as agricultural and outside HOA boundaries. Just to be safe, I photographed every page, labeling and storing them in both digital and printed form. 3 days later, I came home to find an envelope taped to my front door. The logo of the Maple Ridge HOA glared at me from the corner. Inside was a formal notice of violation, demanding that I remove all agricultural activity within 14 days, or face fines of $100 per day. The citation referenced neighborhood landscaping standards and approved community aesthetics. I called the county records office the same afternoon. A clerk pulled up my file and confirmed what I already knew. "Yes, Mr. Cole, your property is zoned agricultural, always has been. The HOA has no authority whatsoever over your land. Would you like written confirmation?" "Yes, please," I said, relief flooding me. "Send it by certified mail if you can." "And email." Armed with official documentation, I drafted a polite but firm letter attaching every relevant page, deed maps, zoning language. The next morning, I walked it down to the HOA office myself, handed it to a bored receptionist, and kept a copy of the delivery receipt. For a week, silence. I let myself believe maybe, just maybe, they'd back down. Then came the second wave. I was out in the field harvesting bell peppers when my neighbor Jeff, a grizzled man in his 60s who lived half a mile down the road, strolled up. He leaned against my fence, chewing on a toothpick. "Thought you should know," he said, voice low. "They were talking about you at the HOA meeting last night. That Karen woman Whitmore, she's got it out for you. I handed him a pepper. What did she say? He bit into it, nodding at the flavor. She kept calling this place the eyesore farm. Said she needs to take action before other folks get the same idea. Some board members agreed. Others reminded her you're not even in their territory. Didn't seem to matter. Did she mention my letter? The zoning documents, Jeff shook his head. She acted like she'd never seen them. Watch your back. She's got half that board wrapped around her finger. That night uneasy, I ordered 4 security cameras and spent the weekend installing them, 1 at the gate, 1 on the barn, and 2 overlooking the fields. It cost more than I liked, but Jeff's warning gnawed at me. 2 days later, my investment paid off. I returned from the farmer's market to find several carrot tops yanked out their roots, shriveling in the sunday. I hurried to my laptop and pulled up the camera feeds. My stomach sank. There she was, Karen herself, leading 3 people in matching polo shirts with HOA Landscaping Committee embroidered on the chest. They walked my rows, pointing, jotting notes, even tugging plants out of the ground like thieves in broad daylight. I printed still images and added them to my growing evidence file. The next morning, another envelope appeared. This one more aggressive. Your property has been declared a public nuisance, it read, and fines are hereby increased to $250 per day, retroactive to the date of first notice. At the bottom, in bold red ink, Karen had scrawled by hand, "Perhaps now you'll take us seriously." I stood there, letter trembling in my hand, a mix of fury and disbelief surging through me. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was war. The letter burned in my hands like a threat carved in red ink. I read it 3 times, each word fueling the fire in my chest. A nuisance, retroactive fines $250 a day. For growing vegetables on land I'd worked so hard to buy, it was absurd, but worse, it was deliberate. Karen Whitmore wasn't making a mistake. She was making a statement. I called my lawyer, Sarah Nguyen, a longtime friend from my teaching days who had switched careers into property law. She listened quietly while I explained, then let out a low whistle. "Don't pay a cent," she said firmly. "Those fines are meaningless. You're outside their jurisdiction. What you're dealing with is harassment. Document everything, Ethan. Every letter, every photograph, every trespass. And for heaven's sake, post no trespassing signs. If they step foot on your land again, we can escalate to criminal trespassing." That night I hammered bright orange, no trespassing signs into the ground along every edge of my property. I wanted there to be no excuse. I even marked the corners with reflective survey stakes from the county office. If Karen thought she could twist reality, I would pin it down with stakes and nails. For 3 days it was quiet. Too quiet. I let myself believe maybe she'd gotten the message. I harvested peppers and squash, packaged them for the weekend market, and almost began to relax. Then came the roar of engines at dawn. I stumbled out of bed still in pajamas when I heard machinery outside. A landscaping truck was idling on the road, and 2 men in uniforms were approaching my tomato beds with weed trimmers. I bolted across the yard. "Stop right there," I shouted, my bare feet slapping the dirt. "This is private property." The men froze, looking uncertain. One of them held a clipboard. "We have orders from the Maple Ridge HOA," he explained. "We're here to clean up this area." He showed me the work order. Karen's signature glared back at me from the bottom of the page. "This property is not part of Maple Ridge," I said, pointing at my newly planted signs. "I don't blame you for doing your job, but if you cut a single plant, you'll be liable for damages." They hesitated. The second man muttered something about not wanting to get sued. Finally, they apologized and climbed back into their truck, leaving tire tracks in the gravel as they pulled away. My hands shook with anger as I dialed Sarah. "They sent contractors," I said, voice tight. "They had orders signed by Karen herself." Sarah didn't even pause. "Then this has crossed the line. That's attempted destruction of property. I'll draft a cease and desist letter today. In the meantime, Ethan, make your boundaries as clear as possible. More markers, more signs, and keep your cameras rolling." By afternoon, bright survey flags dotted my fence lines like a parade of defiance. I added a trail camera hidden in the branches of a maple tree, aimed directly at the corner they'd targeted. Then I stood back, looking over the neat rows of vegetables, the fruit trees beginning to blossom, the soil I'd poured my sweat into. Why couldn't they just leave me alone? The answer came 2 nights later. I was at the feed store when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my cameras. I opened the live feed and nearly dropped the phone. There they were, Karen and 5 HOA members' polo shirts gleaming under the sun, carrying baskets. They were harvesting my vegetables like it was a public garden. Cucumbers, peppers, zucchini, all ripped from the soil I'd nurtured. "They're stealing my tomatoes," I muttered into the phone, dialing Sarah in a panic. "I'm 15 minutes away," she said. Don't confront them alone, Ethan. Call the police now. My fingers trembled as I dialed 911. They're stealing from me, I told the dispatcher. Trespassing right now in broad daylight. I floored the truck, heart-pounding gravel spitting behind me. When I pulled up, Karen was bent over my heirloom tomato plants, my pride worth $6 each at the market. 6 baskets were already overflowing with produce. One man, Thomas Blake, the HOA treasurer, was biting into a tomato juice running down his chin. Stop right there, I bellowed, leaping out of the truck. What do you think you're doing? Karen straightened, utterly unashamed. Your yard was unkempt, she said smoothly. We assumed the food was going to waste. We're helping ourselves to what you clearly don't value. I pointed at my signs, at my cameras. This is private property. You're trespassing. You're stealing. I've already called the police. Karen smirked. We're the HOA. We have every right to enforce standards. You have no jurisdiction, I snapped. I've shown you the documents. Thomas wiped tomato juice from his mouth, grinning. Documents can be changed. We've already spoken to the county about rezoning. My stomach dropped. Rezoning, could they really do that? Before I could answer, the wail of a siren cut through the air. A police cruiser pulled up, Officer Martinez stepping out, his hand resting casually on his belt. What's going on here? I rushed to him. These people are trespassing, stealing my crops. I have video signs, paperwork, everything. Karen spoke over me. We were conducting a community inspection, removing unhealthy plants. This man refuses to comply with standards. This land isn't part of their community, I argued, pulling out my phone. I have proof. Sarah's car screeched up just then. She strode over, sharp and confident. I'm Mr. Cole's attorney, she announced. Officer, my client wants to press charges for trespassing and theft, and I strongly suggest these individuals return what they've taken. Officer Martinez looked between us uneasy. Do you have documentation of your zoning? Yes, I said. In my house, and I have camera footage of them filling baskets. Karen folded her arms. We've done nothing wrong. Sarah crossed her arms. Then you won't mind explaining it to a judge. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in Thomas's eyes. He set his basket down slowly. Karen hissed something under her breath, but motioned for the others to do the same. One by one, they abandoned the stolen vegetables. This isn't over, Karen spat as they slunk back to the road. I knew she was right. This was only the beginning. When the HOA caravan retreated down the road, baskets of my produce abandoned in the dirt, I thought the worst might be over. The police had seen them trespass, my lawyer had stood toe-to-toe with their president, and I had undeniable footage. Surely, I told myself, this would make them back off. But power-hungry people rarely retreat. They regroup. The next morning, I found another envelope taped to my mailbox. This time, the letterhead was bolder stamped, with an attorney's office representing Maple Ridge HOA. The language was colder, too. According to them, I owed $7 800 inches, accumulated fines for public nuisance conditions, excessive vegetation, and unapproved agricultural activity. The letter threatened to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay within 30 days. A lien. They were escalating from trespass to financial warfare. I called Sarah, immediately reading the letter aloud. She listened carefully, then said, "They've made a critical mistake. By threatening legal action, they've opened themselves up. Now we can go on the offensive." What do you mean? I asked, gripping the letter so hard the paper crumpled. They want a legal fight. Good. We'll give them one. But first, I want us at the county records office. If they're hinting at rezoning, I need to see what they've filed. That afternoon, we drove to the county courthouse, the same building where I'd registered my deed 6 months earlier. A clerk pulled the records, and sure enough, my stomach twisted when Sarah spread the papers across the table. 3 weeks ago, Maple Ridge HOA, through their treasurer Thomas Blake, had submitted a formal rezoning request to convert several agricultural parcels, including mine, into residential lots. Sarah tapped her finger on the signature line. And look at this, Thomas is related to Commissioner Williams. That's their play. They want to push you out, devalue your crops, and open the land for development. The pieces fell together like a cruel puzzle. The harassment wasn't about aesthetics, it was about greed. Back on my farm, I couldn't shake the image of them strolling my rows with baskets like they were shopping at a free buffet. My tomatoes, my peppers, my zucchini, all treated as worthless weeds. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house had me checking the cameras. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with another motion alert. I opened the feed and felt ice slide down my spine. There, caught in grainy black and white, was Thomas himself. He wore dark clothes, his face illuminated only when he glanced toward the infrared beam. In his hands gleamed a pair of wire cutters. I watched, sick to my stomach, as he crouched near my irrigation lines and began snipping. Water gushed into the soil, soaking it until it bled mud. He moved methodically, cutting 3 different sections before jogging back into the shadows. By dawn, a quarter of my crops were wilting. Leaves sagged, soil cracked dry where the water had drained away. Thousands of dollars of produce were ruined overnight. I called Karen directly, my voice shaking with rage. "Your treasurer destroyed my irrigation. I have him on camera. This is criminal vandalism." Her tone was maddeningly calm. "Don't be dramatic, Ethan. Thomas was investigating a leak that was affecting our community. If anything, you should thank him. Investigating at 2 in the morning with wire cutters. While laughing, I think you're misinterpreting the footage. Maybe if you complied with our requests, none of this would happen." And then she hung up. By mid-morning, Sarah was at my kitchen table again, her face tight with anger as she watched the footage. This isn't just harassment anymore. This is targeted destruction of property. And combined with their rezoning attempt, it paints a clear picture of intent. She drafted a temporary restraining order and filed it that same day. Meanwhile, I worked until sunset, repairing pipes, hauling water by hand to salvage what plants I could. My back ached, my hands blistered, but anger kept me moving. As if sensing my exhaustion, a delivery truck pulled into my driveway just as darkness fell. The driver handed me a thick, certified letter. My stomach sank as I opened it. Inside was another notice from the HOA's attorney, doubling down failure to comply would result in all available legal remedies, including forced compliance through court order. I leaned against the porch rail, staring at the stars. They thought they had me cornered. But if they wanted a fight in court, then court is where we'd go. The next morning, I hammered stakes into the ground at the edge of my property. But this time, I wasn't posting warnings, I was posting prices. The sign was impossible to miss. Maple Ridge HOA members all produce $50 per item. Trespassing fee $500. 24/7 cameras. Sarah had laughed when I told her my plan. "You're turning their harassment into a public statement. Just make sure it's legal." "It's my land," I'd said. "I'll treat them like the grocery shoppers they act like." Beside the bold red letters, I set up my roadside stand with normal prices for everyone else. $3 a pound for tomatoes, $5 for berries, $1 for fresh peppers. A handwritten note explained why HOA members faced special pricing, harassment, theft, and trespassing. Word spread like wildfire. By noon, my stand was busier than it had ever been. Families from neighboring towns came not just for vegetables, but to support the farmer fighting back. Even residents of Maple Ridge, the ones tired of Karen's tyranny, stopped by to buy zucchini and whisper encouragement. "She's gone too far this time," said Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived on the corner lot. "Half the neighborhood is scared to speak against her, but plenty of us are on your side." Hope stirred in me. For the first time since this war began, I wasn't fighting alone. Of course, Karen couldn't stay away. By mid-afternoon, a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of my stand. Karen stormed out, Thomas trailing behind her. When she read the sign, her face flushed crimson. "Remove that immediately," she shouted, jabbing her finger at me. "This is harassment. It violates our bylaws, my property, my rules," I said calmly, loud enough for the crowd of customers to hear. "Unless you'd like to admit in front of these witnesses that you have jurisdiction here." Karen glanced at the phones, recording her every word. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. But uncertainty wasn't enough. I knew she'd be back angrier than ever, and next time she wouldn't come alone. The battle for my farm had only just begun. I should have known Karen wouldn't let public humiliation go unanswered. The SUV's tire tracks hadn't even faded from the gravel when I realized this wasn't a victory, it was simply the next round in a longer war. The following morning, I woke to find my sign smashed to splinters. Shards of wood littered the roadside, and the bright red paint I'd brushed so carefully was gouged away in jagged streaks. Someone had taken a crowbar to it, with ruthless efficiency. Taped to my front door was yet another violation notice, 6 pages long this time, claiming I now owed $155, 600 inches fines for illegal commercial activity and discriminatory business practices. For a moment, rage nearly drowned me. But then I remembered the blinking LED of my hidden trail camera. I rushed inside, pulled up the footage, and there they were. Karen and Thomas, 3:17 a.m., hammers and crowbars in hand. The video caught everything, the gleam of their tools, their laughter, even Karen's voice hissing. "That'll shut him up." It was a gift wrapped in arrogance. By noon, I had emailed the footage to Sarah. She called back almost instantly. "Ethan, this is open and shut criminal vandalism. Combined with the trespassing and crop theft, it's enough to take them to court tomorrow." and trust me, we will. But Sarah wasn't the only one interested. For weeks, I'd been sending bits of evidence to a local news reporter named Kelly Yates, who had been investigating HOA abuses across the county. When she saw the footage, her voice crackled with excitement over the phone. This is exactly the kind of case we've been looking for. HOAs act like private governments, but people rarely have proof. You've got gold, Ethan. I'm bringing a crew this afternoon. Part of me worried it was reckless. Going public would paint a target even brighter on my back. But another part, the stubborn, tired part, was done hiding. By 3 p.m., Kelly's van was parked by my farm cameras, rolling as she interviewed me beside the ruins of my sign. Behind us, neighbors gathered, whispering among themselves, some recording on their phones. HOAs wield enormous power with very little oversight, Kelly explained into the camera. But here in Maple Ridge, that power may have gone too far. She turned to me. Ethan, what do you hope comes from all of this? I looked into her lens, sweat glistening on my brow. I don't care about fines or threats. I care about protecting what's mine. This land is legal farmland, and no bully in a blazer is going to change that. If they think my tomatoes are weeds, let a judge tell them that. Applause rippled through the small crowd. For the first time, Karen wasn't controlling the narrative. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. Mid-interview, the black SUV appeared again, braking so hard the tires screamed. Karen stormed out, red-faced and fuming, Thomas right behind her. You're trespassing on HOA authority, she shouted, jabbing a finger toward Kelly's camera. Kelly raised an eyebrow. Would you care to explain why our footage shows you destroying this man's property at 3 a.m.? Karen froze, lips opening and closing like a fish. That's ridiculous. I was home asleep. I stepped forward, holding up a flash drive. I have the video. Just like I have you stealing my crops, cutting my irrigation, and trespassing over and over. Do you want me to play it for everyone here? The crowd murmured, phones lifted higher. For the first time, I saw true fear crack across Karen's face. Without another word, she spun on her heel, dragging Thomas back to the SUV. The vehicle roared away, gravel spitting behind it. That night, Sarah called again. The DA's office has already requested copies of your footage. Ethan, this is bigger than a property dispute. They're considering criminal charges, trespass, theft, vandalism, even conspiracy. I sat on my porch listening to the cicadas. My farm was scarred, pipes cut, crops trampled, signs destroyed, but for the first time I felt like maybe, just maybe, justice was catching up. The next day the pressure mounted. The local paper ran a front-page story with the headline, HOA president caught on camera destroying farmer's property. Neighbors who had avoided me before now stopped by with words of support. Some brought food, others offered to help rebuild my sign. Even Maple Ridge residents whispered about calling for an emergency board meeting. But Karen still had allies. That afternoon, as I inspected my damaged tomato, rose a car slowed at the edge of my property. Inside sat Thomas, his expression dark, his phone pressed to his ear. He lingered for a long moment, eyes locked on mine, before finally driving off. Sarah wasn't surprised when I told her. They're rattled, she said. But don't underestimate them. They still think they can win by dragging this through politics. That rezoning application is their last card. Rezoning. The word gnawed at me like a worm in ripe fruit. If the county approved their application, they could strangle me legally, no matter what the footage showed. That evening, I emailed the county zoning board, demanding updates on the status of the rezoning request. I also filed a public records request for any communications between the HOA and Commissioner Williams. If they thought their connections would protect them, I intended to drag every shadow deal into the sunlight. By the time I went to bed, exhaustion weighed me down like lead. But before sleep claimed me, I glanced once more at the footage of Karen and Thomas swinging their crowbars, their faces lit by the harsh glow of my security lights. It was proof that bullies eventually reveal themselves, no matter how carefully they hide behind bylaws and boardrooms. They thought they could bleed me dry with fines and fear. But I had something they didn't, truth, and the resolve to fight to the bitter end, and if court was where this battle was headed, then I was ready. When the newspaper story hit stands and the TV segment ran on the evening news, I knew Maple Ridge HOA had lost control of the narrative. For once, the spotlight wasn't on their glossy brochures or their self-proclaimed community standards. It was on Karen Whitmore, caught in full color, vandalizing my property at 3 a.m. The response was immediate. Strangers began showing up at my roadside stand, not just to buy vegetables, but to shake my hand. "We saw you on TV," one older woman said, clutching a basket of peppers. "You're standing up for all of us who've been bullied by HOAs." Her voice cracked with emotion. I realized my fight had become something larger, symbolic. But Karen was nothing if not persistent. I woke one morning to find not just notices on my door, but an entire packet, 30 pages of new violations. According to her, my roadside stand was an illegal business venture, and my pricing policy was discriminatory commerce. She claimed the HOA board had unanimously voted to fine me $5,500 a day until I shut it down. $5,500 a day. They weren't just trying to ruin me, they were trying to erase me. I handed the packet to Sarah over coffee that morning. She skimmed it, then burst out laughing. "They're citing HOA bylaws, Ethan. You're not even in their boundaries. This isn't worth the paper it's printed on." Still, the intimidation tactics worked on some of my nerves. That evening, I found myself pacing the porch, staring at the glow of Maple Ridge in the distance. Their streetlights gleamed like watchtowers. I couldn't shake the feeling of being surrounded. 2 days later, Kelly returned with her crew for a follow-up. We filmed a segment right beside my new sign, this time reinforced with steel posts sunk in concrete. They tore it down once I told the camera, but I'll rebuild 100 times if I have to. This farm isn't going anywhere. The story spread beyond the county. State newspapers picked it up. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #HOA Overreach and #Farmers Fight Back. Neighbors who once avoided me now waved as they passed. Some even slipped me envelopes of photos and documents detailing their own run-ins with Karen treehouses, ordered torn-down garden gnomes confiscated, even a family fined for hanging holiday lights too early. Each story went into my growing evidence binder. Then came the confrontation I'll never forget. It was a Saturday afternoon, the stand buzzing with customers when the black SUV rolled up again. This time, Karen wasn't alone. 4 board members stepped out with her clipboards in hand, expressions grim. She marched right up to my stand and pointed at the bold red letters, "Maple Ridge, HOA members $50 per item. Trespassing fee $500. You will remove this sign immediately," she demanded, her voice cutting through the chatter of the crowd. "It is defamatory, discriminatory, and violates community bylaws." "My land," I said evenly. "My rules. You can't charge different prices to different people," Thomas barked. "Actually, I can refuse service to anyone who's trespassed and stolen from me. And you both qualify." I pulled out my folder of still frames from the security footage. "Would you like me to pass these around?" Several customers leaned closer, eyes narrowing as they saw the photos of Karen and Thomas hauling baskets of my tomatoes. One young woman gasped, "You mean they actually stole from you?" Karen stepped forward, face flushing. "This is a private matter between the Homeowners Association and a non-compliant property." I spread the official county boundary map across the table. "Except this isn't your territory. These are the lines stamped and recorded. My farm lies completely outside Maple Ridge. Your HOA has zero jurisdiction here." The crowd pressed closer. Mrs. Rodriguez, clutching her bag of zucchini, gasped loudly. "They've been lying to us. The HOA newsletter said his farm was breaking rules. But he's not even part of Maple Ridge." Karen's eyes darted from face to face. Phones were raised everywhere, recording her every twitch. For the first time, her mask slipped. She looked cornered. "This isn't over," she hissed, snatching Thomas by the arm. "You'll regret making an enemy of me." The SUV sped away, leaving behind stunned silence. Then slowly the crowd erupted in cheers. My sales that day broke every record I'd ever had. People drove in from 2 counties eager to buy vegetables from the farmer who stood up to an HOA tyrant. That night, hope swelled in me again. For the first time in months, I sat on my porch and smiled as the sun set over the rows of green. Maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning. But hope has a cruel way of setting you up. At dawn, I found my sign smashed again, this time beyond repair. Splintered wood lay in the ditch, steel posts bent at unnatural angles. Nailed to my barn door were 6 fresh violation notices, fines doubled, accusations multiplied. It was Karen's way of saying, "I'm still here." My fists clenched as I downloaded the night's camera footage. And there it was, crystal clear, Karen and Thomas once again, crowbars in hand, faces lit under my security lights. Their arrogance had given me the perfect weapon. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was war, and soon it would move from my fields to the courthouse steps. The following Monday, Sarah and I sat in her office, a fortress of legal pads, binders, and stacks of county records. She had the footage paused on her laptop, Karen and Thomas, in high-definition crowbars glinting under my security lights as they swung at my sign. Sarah leaned back, arms crossed, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Ethan, this is it. With this footage, plus everything else we've gathered, we don't just have a defense. We have a case. Civil and criminal. They've handed us the rope, and I intend to tie it tight." Her confidence steadied me. but the weight of the past weeks clung like sweat on my skin. My farm had become a battlefield, my crops a target, my peace a memory, and yet part of me relished the thought of finally turning the tables. That afternoon, the local news aired Kelly's second segment. The footage of Karen and Thomas vandalizing my sign played on a loop, their faces unmistakable. The anchor's voice was sharp. Tonight, questions are mounting about Maple Ridge HOA's overreach. Are homeowners associations acting above the law? The phone rang off the hook. Friends, old students, even strangers called to tell me they saw the story. Some offered donations for legal fees, others volunteered to help on the farm. For the first time, I realized Karen's reign of intimidation had cracked wide open, but not everyone was celebrating. At dusk, as I watered what was left of my wilting tomatoes, a sedan slowed at the edge of my driveway. The window rolled down just enough for a voice to carry across the gravel. "You don't know who you're messing with," a man muttered, then sped off. I recognized him, one of the HOA board members who'd stood beside Karen at the stand confrontation. I didn't tell Sarah right away. Instead, I spent that night pacing shotgun propped in the corner, refreshing my camera feeds every hour. Sleep was impossible. By morning, another blow landed. An official-looking envelope arrived from the county zoning board. My hands trembled as I tore it open. "Dear Mr. Cole, this letter confirms receipt of application number HZR 2247 requesting rezoning of parcels, including your property from agricultural to residential. Public comment period begins in 30 days. They'd actually done it. The HOA wasn't bluffing. They were trying to erase my farm with the stroke of a pen. I called Sarah immediately, reading the letter aloud. Her voice hardened. They've crossed into political manipulation. And with Thomas's connection to Commissioner Williams, it reeks of corruption. But listen, this isn't a death sentence. Rezoning agricultural land in this county isn't easy. They'll need proof your farm causes actual harm, environmental, economic, or health-related. Petty complaints about aesthetics won't cut it. We can fight this. Still, the idea that a handful of board members thought they could rewrite the law just to push me out churned my stomach. That evening, Kelly returned, this time with a larger crew. She wanted to dig deeper. "People across the state are watching this now," she said, setting up lights by my barn. "But I need more than footage of vandalism. Do you have evidence of why they're targeting you specifically?" I hesitated, then handed her the rezoning notice. "They don't want vegetables gone. They want me gone. And if they succeed, this land becomes prime real estate." Kelly's eyes widened as she read. "This is bigger than an HOA. This is development money." The story aired the next night with a new headline: HOA power grab farmers' land targeted for rezoning amid harassment claims. The fallout was immediate. Neighbors I barely knew stopped by with casseroles and jars of preserves, whispering that they supported me. A few Maple Ridge residents admitted they'd voted for Karen years ago but regretted it. One man even confessed. "She threatened to fine me over my kid's swing set. I paid just to avoid the fight. Wish I'd stood up like you." Every story I heard fueled me. I wasn't just fighting for my farm anymore. I was fighting for every neighbor she'd silenced. Then, just when I thought things couldn't escalate further, they did. At 2 a.m., one night, my cameras triggered again. I jolted awake, heart hammering, and pulled the feed onto my phone. This time, it wasn't Karen or Thomas. It was two young men, faces hidden under hoodies, carrying spray cans. They moved fast, scrawling "eyesore farm" across my barn in dripping black letters. By the time I grabbed my flashlight and stormed outside, they were gone. The acrid smell of paint hung heavy in the air. I emailed the footage to Sarah in the morning. She sighed. "Classic intimidation. They're trying to wear you down, Ethan. But don't let them. Every act like this strengthens our case." I spent that day scrubbing paint muscles, aching fury rising with every stroke of the brush. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was furious. 3 days later, Sarah called with news that shifted everything. "We have a court date," she said. "Restraining order hearing next week." But that's not all. I pulled HOA financials through a public records request. Guess what I found? I braced myself. Payments from the HOA's reserve fund directly to Blake Construction, Thomas's company. Line items labeled consulting. "Ethan, this isn't just harassment, it's fraud. They're funneling HOA dues into his business while trying to seize your land for development." I gripped the phone, stunned. Suddenly it all clicked: the rezoning push, the vandalism, the relentless fines. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was about money, power, and corruption. "They wanted me gone," I said slowly, "so Thomas could build." Sarah's voice was fierce. "And now we have them exactly where we want them." That night, as I walked the rows of my battered but still standing crops, I thought about what lay ahead. The courthouse, the rezoning battle, the inevitable smears they'd throw my way. But for the first time, I felt something stronger than fear: resolve. The war wasn't over, but I finally had the weapons to fight back. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and coffee, the kind of scent that clings to government buildings where too many battles have been fought in too few rooms. My palms were slick with sweat as I adjusted my tie, an unfamiliar piece of clothing I dug out from the back of my closet. This wasn't just another day of farm work or chasing trespassers off my land. This was the day I'd face Karen and her board on neutral ground. "Breathe," Sarah whispered beside me as we waited for the bailiff to call the case. Her confidence was a lifeline. "We have everything we need. Let them hang themselves." Across the aisle, Karen and Thomas sat with their lawyer, a slick man in a three-piece suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a real estate magazine. Karen wore her usual blazer pearls at her throat, but her hands trembled as she shuffled papers. Thomas tried for bravado, smirking in my direction, but the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Harriet Thompson swept into the room, robes flowing, eyes sharp. She looked like the kind of woman who had zero patience for games. I swallowed hard. This was it. "Case number 2247, the clerk announced. Maple Ridge Homeowners Association versus Cole. Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Quite the neighborhood dispute we have here. Counsel, explain why your clients believe they have authority over property, clearly marked as agricultural on county maps." The HOA's lawyer rose, voice smooth as butter. "Your Honor, while technically outside HOA boundaries, Mr. Cole's property creates substantial negative impacts on our community's property values. We have expert testimony." "That wasn't my question," the judge cut in steel in her tone. "I asked about legal authority, not opinions about tomatoes." Laughter rippled through the spectators. I caught Karen's cheeks flushing crimson. When it was our turn, Sarah rose, calmly clicking the projector remote. One by one, video clips appeared on the courtroom screen, Karen and her crew hauling baskets of my produce. Thomas crouched in the dark with wire cutters severing my irrigation, the two of them smashing my sign with crowbars. Each image was time-stamped, crisp, undeniable. The courtroom was silent except for the whir of the projector fan. "Your Honor," Sarah said, firmly pointing at the screen, "this is not about aesthetics. This is harassment, vandalism, and theft. The HOA has no jurisdiction here yet. Its president and treasurer repeatedly trespassed, destroyed crops worth thousands, and attempted to intimidate my client into surrendering his land." The judge's gaze fixed on Karen. "Mrs. Whitmore, is that you in the video?" Karen's lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently. After a long pause, she lifted her chin. "Yes, but the context," Judge Thompson interrupted, "appears to be you destroying private property at 3 a.m. Her eyes shifted to Thomas. "And Mr. Blake, is this you cutting irrigation lines?" Thomas stammered. "We were investigating a leak at 3 a.m. with wire cutters while laughing." The judge's voice was cold. "Do not insult my intelligence." The spectators whispered furiously. Reporters scribbled notes so fast their pens squeaked. But the real bombshell came when Sarah called Angela Winters, the former HOA secretary, to the stand. Angela looked nervous, wringing her hands, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Mrs. Whitmore specifically targeted Mr. Cole's farm after Thomas Blake's development proposal was rejected. She said, and I quote, 'If we can't buy him out, we'll force him out.'" Gasps filled the courtroom. I gripped the edge of the table as Angela continued. She promised board members favors and positions if they supported her. The rezoning application was part of a coordinated plan to seize his land. Karen's face went pale. Thomas muttered something under his breath, but the damage was done. Judge Thompson's gavel slammed down. Order. The rest of the day was a blur of testimony. Officer Martinez confirmed my property was outside HOA boundaries and recounted multiple calls involving the HOA's harassment. My neighbor, Mrs. Patel, testified she'd seen them stealing vegetables. Even the county zoning inspector admitted their claims of nuisance were baseless. By late afternoon, Karen looked like a statue carved from stone, unblinking, rigid. Thomas tapped furiously at his phone, his smirk long gone. Finally, Judge Thompson leaned forward, removing her glasses. "I've heard enough. We will recess until tomorrow morning when I'll deliver my ruling. But let me be clear, this court will not tolerate harassment disguised as community management." The gavel fell. As I walked out, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust toward me. "Do you think you'll win?" one shouted. I paused, meeting their eyes. This was never about winning. It's about standing up to bullies who think rules don't apply to them. The truth speaks for itself. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I should have felt relief, but unease churned in my gut. Even if the judge ruled in my favor, would Karen ever truly stop, or had I just painted a bigger target on my back? At dawn, I stood at my kitchen window watching mist rise over the fields. A crowd was already gathering at the courthouse steps for the verdict. Neighbors, farmers, even Maple Ridge residents who had once stayed silent. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every homeowner who'd ever been crushed under the weight of an overreaching HOA. I squared my shoulders. Today, truth would speak louder than intimidation. The courthouse steps were crowded that morning. I parked my old pickup at the far end of the lot and watched in disbelief as people poured in, neighbors, local farmers, even Maple Ridge residents who had once avoided me out of fear of Karen's wrath. Some held signs scribbled with "Sharpie Stop HOA Corruption" and "Farms Feed Families." The buzz of voices filled the cool air, a tide of expectation that pressed against the stone walls. Inside the courtroom was standing room only. Reporters lined the back row, their cameras already rolling. Judge Thompson entered promptly at 9, her gavel cracking through the hum like thunder. Everyone Saturday, my heart hammered like a war drum. I've reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the exhibits. The judge began, her tone measured but fierce. This court finds overwhelmingly in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Ethan Cole. The air shifted gasps, then a low roar of whispers. My knees nearly buckled. Judge Thompson continued, eyes narrowing at Karen and Thomas. The Maple Ridge HOA has no jurisdiction over this property. Their actions, trespassing, theft, vandalism, and attempted rezoning through improper influence, constitute harassment and fraud. Accordingly, I am awarding Mr. Cole damages in the amount of $443,500 to compensate for destroyed crops, irrigation systems, emotional distress, and attorney's fees. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Karen's pearls gleamed against her throat, but her face was ashen. Thomas's mouth fell open, his phone slipping from his hand onto the table with a loud clack. The judge wasn't done. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent injunction prohibiting any HOA board member from entering or interfering with Mr. Cole's property. And I am referring this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges, including conspiracy and vandalism. Her gavel slammed. Court adjourned. The room exploded, reporters rushing forward, neighbors clapping, voices colliding in a storm of noise. Sarah squeezed my arm. "We did it, Ethan. They can't touch you anymore." But as we stepped into the sunlight, I realized something bigger had shifted. The crowd outside wasn't just cheering for me. They were cheering for themselves, for every person who had been fined for a crooked mailbox or forced to tear down a treehouse. I saw relief in their faces, the kind that comes when someone finally proves the bully can be beaten. That evening, I returned home to find a caravan of cars pulling into my driveway. At first, panic rose in my chest, but then I saw the faces. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman from the corner lot, stepped forward with a group of Maple Ridge residents carrying lumber, paint, and baskets of food. "We heard about the ruling," she said softly. "We're here to help rebuild your sign and your farm." Tears pricked my eyes as they set to work. Neighbors I'd never spoken to hammered posts, painted boards, and harvested what crops had survived. Children darted through the rows, laughing, pulling weeds with tiny hands. The farm that had once been a target now pulsed with life, a community reborn from conflict. 2 nights later, I got another surprise. Angela Winters, the former HOA secretary who'd testified against Karen, knocked on my door. She looked nervous, but her voice was steady. They forced Karen and Thomas to resign. The board called an emergency meeting. People are furious about the settlement, about being lied to. They want to make things right. She handed me a paper signed by the new interim president, Mr. Ramirez. It was an official apology and a proposal, a community garden partnership with volunteers from Maple Ridge, offering labor in exchange for shared produce. More importantly, the board had voted unanimously to create a permanent easement recognizing my farm's agricultural status. No future HOA board could ever challenge it again. I sat at my table long after she left, staring at the document. For months, this war had consumed me. And now, not only had I won, but something unexpected had grown from the ashes. 1 week later, on a Saturday morning, I stood at the edge of my fields and watched as 25 people, families, retirees, even teenagers arrived with gloves and tools. Together, we planted new rows of corn, tomatoes, and beans. Children squealed as they watered seedlings, neighbors swapped stories while pulling weeds, and laughter echoed across the land. As I handed a seedling to a boy no older than 10, he looked up at me with wide eyes. "Where do we start?" I smiled, pressing the roots into his small hands. We start by growing something new. By summer's end, my farm wasn't just mine anymore. It was the heart of a community. Where Karen once saw an eyesore people, now saw abundance. Where Thomas saw prophet children, now saw pumpkins sprouting from rich soil. The roadside stand had become a gathering place, with families bringing lemonade pies and music. One evening, as we harvested corn under a painted sunset, Mr. Ramirez approached holding a folded document. "The board voted unanimously today," he said. "Your farm is protected permanently. No HOA will ever touch it again." I unfolded the paper, my throat tight. The fight was over. And in its place, something stronger had taken root: trust, unity, and the simple power of neighbors working together. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not the fragile kind I'd once sought in solitude, but a deeper peace that comes from knowing you've stood your ground, faced the storm, and planted something that will last. Because sometimes the hardest battles don't just defend what's yours, they sow the seeds of something greater. If this fight taught me anything, it's that bullies thrive on silence. HOA Karen and her cronies believed they could intimidate me into giving up because so many before me had stayed quiet. But once I documented, spoke up, and refused to back down, the truth took on a life of its own. It showed me that communities aren't built on fear, they're built on people willing to stand together even when it's hard. To everyone watching, if you've ever faced your own Karen, know this: your voice matters, your rights matter, and standing firm can change everything. Drop a comment below with your own HOA story, or simply let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because there are more battles, more lessons, and more victories still to share.